All right. This is the final wrap-up session, and I want to first of all give out production credit to the audience because you're all responsible for this production, and I know you all helped script it. So you are also going to be the audience and the critics. We have here our a set of officers of our corporation. The CEO is down at the end, and he has with him 3 executive vice presidents who are going to hear the proposals from your groups today. I understand from the CEO that he really likes to have his executive VPs ask the questions first, and then he comes in and asks the really tough ones that they've forgotten to ask. Each group presents, and of course this is a countdown, so we're going to start with group number 3, and Ezra is the spokesperson and champion for a proposal that he's bringing before the executive committee.
Usually when we're making these kinds of presentations at work, I know the group that we're presenting to, I know how tough they're going to be, and here I just have no idea. And quite frankly, the proposal that our group came up with, if it went before our executive committee, would get torn to pieces. But let me at least share the ideas that came out. I want to hold it away from them for a minute. You're welcome to it. Basically, the ideas that we discussed were that there's a need to demonstrate the possibility of achieving results actually before going to executive committee. That if you come to, if you go ahead with what is essentially just ideas without any demonstrable results to take to them, it makes it very difficult to gain any support for this kind of thing. So what we thought was first to encourage, I guess, different skunk works to begin work on C type of activity almost independently, working on an existing real problem or problems, show that real results are possible, choose a relatively low risk undertaking, and show that the results are measurable. And once you have something like that you can take to senior management, then you go to the senior executives and say, okay, this is what has been going on. We have, just fantastic results to show you, and there's corporate-wide applicability for this kind of activity. Especially the last point is that the collective knowledge of these skunk works can act as a coach for the whole organization. And I think that more or less is what we had talked about. And then after talking a little bit more, we came to the conclusion that in fact all you really need to do is do this in the context of total quality management, because a lot of what we were talking about is the sort of thing that goes on in TQM. And basically, to summarize our proposal, I guess, as we say, do these activities in the context of TQM, and we want to, in order to gain support for this kind of undertaking, we want to be able to show tangible results in order to get acceptance and to get resources to extend this activity.
Well, Mr. Miller, what is your proposal?
Our proposal is that given that all these skunk works have been taking place, we have...
Skunk works?
Well, our organization, unbeknownst to you, has been undertaking all kinds of activities to greatly improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the overall organization. And on a pilot basis, we've undertaken a number of projects that have shown tangible results.
What are these results? I mean, what's going on here? This is the first I've ever heard of it.
Young man, which vice president do you report up to?
Well, whichever one it was, I thought you were going to come back with a strategic plan for us. And now you're telling us you're going to do skunk works until you get a bunch of data, you'll come to us. When do we see a strategic plan? That's what our charter was.
This is where I turn to other members of the group.
Have you discussed who actually will be funding these initial skunk works, and how are they going to buy into this initial concept?
The intention was that the skunk works would come out of existing programs, and that was the whole idea, was that it wouldn't initially require any additional resources, but we would try this on a kind of a pilot basis. And
so it'd be kind of a tax that these initial skunk work programs would actually have to pay in order to...
A tax?
A tax, in other words.
No, not a tax.
So who gets taxed to pay for those? That's not what Sam is saying?
Well, this would be done, I suppose, in the context of existing activities.
And no greater cost to the program.
Perhaps at a saving.
Have we discussed what the measures of effectiveness or what the actual differences in program performance are that you'll be measuring?
No, we haven't.
Well, I'm at a loss. I'm not. I don't know what I don't know what you're proposing, Ezra.
Some members of the team.
It also sounds like from the last few comments that we've heard that I don't hear a lot more that's being presented other than the TQM, which I believe our company has already adopted. Right?
I think the feeling is that in the context of the work that's going on in TQM, there's a great deal of knowledge that can be shared across different parts of the organization that is not being shared, and that were that information and knowledge to be shared, it could greatly enhance the effectiveness of the TQM effort.
So we could redirect some of the TQM funds that we've already allocated for that initiative.
If that was appropriate, yeah.
Thank you very much. Your time is up, and the board has a very heavy agenda.
Thank goodness.
And,
Good job. They didn't understand it, but good job.
Next.
number 2, group number 2 is now on the docket. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation and then to go on to the question.
Is there a white hat? I at least want to be unbiased when I come up here.
Walter has proved that he has the appropriate executive knowledge.
Well, you've made a good start, Ted.
You have to wear this like yeah, so he can hear you. Put it in there somewhere.
You get ready for
Let's see. Is the camera look big? Well, he will be. You just have to leave it and just let it sit there, and then he'll direct it. Don't tell me about your work.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to come to this presentation. As you know, we have started a small group within ESL known as the 2020 Group to begin developing long-term 30-year planning. I want to thank you all again for your support of this group. Our purpose today is actually to get the kind of support for this group to make it successful that we have all agreed we'd like to do. Our long-term purpose here is to develop an institutional capability to do long-term 30-year planning, something that our company has never done here before. We want to do this planning in a way that develops strategic understanding throughout the company, creates a network of leaders and implementers, develops leadership capability, so that ESL will be continually improving its relative competitive advantage. We also want to do this in a way that develops understanding throughout the company of the long-term directions and needs we have. Again, something we've never had the opportunity to do. Creates a network of leaders who can be relied on to provide guidance and energy towards making this plan happen, and really develop leadership capability as a main resource of the company. In looking at this process, we've determined the following criteria for our success. We will find increased communication and collaboration both within and between the different communities that already exist in ESL. We will see better financial performance, but that financial performance needs to be measured over several different time scales as opposed to quarter, and we feel this plan will give us the flexibility to be able to do that. We will find increased employee and customer satisfaction, better quality control for our products, and also the side effect of more and better new products and suggestions of new ideas. What our plan will produce is several different kinds of products. The first kind of product is an increase in the learning capability of the entire organization. The second is a new kind of a document in the company known as a living plan. It's a hyper document that actually will be modified on an ongoing basis by the data that we gather and by the planning process. Third, we will have new and better communication mechanisms for collaboration. Again, something that we have never developed before and something that's absolutely essential to making this plan happen. And an effective display of the output of a plan, not just a paper document, but something that people on a day-to-day basis can actually see the results of the feedback and the data that we gather. And probably most importantly, we'll have increased effectiveness of two different kinds of communities measured by a new kind of living assessment system. We will be self-assessing ourselves as producers of this plan, and we will also be assessing the organization's ability to integrate the results of this planning process. So we want to use the results of this collaborative planning process also as a test with members that are outside of our core group and as a way of gauging whether we're really on target. The capabilities and resources that we feel we will need to do this are first, ongoing support for this core group that this committee, this executive committee has already established. And that committee, as you know, consists of department heads, some of the members of you who are sitting here on the executive staff, and line workers in the organization. We'll need the technology support of a network and hyperdocument resource sharing system that we intend to prototype in a pilot study to show exactly how such a system will work. And we're going to need the resources financially of an implementation team, both within this organization and from the outside, for helping both specify and develop this document system. Thank you, group. Yes, are there any questions? I didn't ask you. Thank you. Yes, you will.
Well, I was struggling with the same thing. What are you asking for? You're asking for support. We can give you support, but more specifically or objectively.
Well, the objective, as you know, this committee that's sitting around here already agreed to set up a group of people to start looking at the planning process. In our own committee, there are 150 of us actually involved in this now on a kind of periodic basis. We've discovered that we don't have the necessary tools to actually make this planning process effective. What we're doing right now is meeting about once a month to talk about long-term planning, but what we really haven't thought about are the kinds of things that are going to make that planning effective. Right now, all we're doing is discussing the idea that planning is an important thing to do, but we haven't actually done it.
Ted, I'd like to ask, currently, you know, with product life cycles becoming shorter and shorter and change accelerating at the rate it is, we're having trouble really seeing through to the end of our 10-year plan. Why do you think this particular process can work in a 30-year planning horizon?
Well, I'm going to turn to one of the members of my committee who has a considerable degree of experience with companies overseas that not only plan in 5- and 10-year cycles, but oftentimes 30, 50, or even longer cycles. Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah. One of the things is when you work with Japanese companies of MITI, they plan on a long term so that they can have a strategic competitive advantage, whether you talk about HD TV, whether you talk about other type of plans. They take a long term not only to visualize something but to bring it into real action. As we can see, like the case of Doug Engelbart and his vision, how long it took something to come into reality. So we feel that unless we have a critical plan which looks into the future and decides some kind of a plan and then walk backwards from there. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in the same current present. We'll be repeating the same thing again and again rather than breaking from the current reality and creating a new reality and creating a new paradigm.
I have another thing to say, and that is that right now the planning process is basically a static one. Whatever planning we've done here is a document that, once it's created, sits on people's desk and has no reflection of any changes that have actually taken place in the marketplace since the time that plan was instituted. That makes it very ineffective to be able to change course of the organization because we're dealing with data that's no longer valid.
Another thing is there is a significant improvement in the organizational performance when people can see a long-term vision, and when people are aligned with what the future is going to be. They have a meaning and they can make significant productivity gains in the organization, both in short term as well as in the long term vision.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I think both of you deserve promotions for this proposal. But what I'd like to
Thank you.
What I'd like to investigate is, have we actually evidence that what you are proposing has been implemented successfully in other organizations and has shown a positive benefit?
I think we have evidence that the planning cycles of many companies abroad are far longer term than our own, and that the evidence of the way in which products develop in those companies, especially in the Far East, shows that they tend to look in much longer cycles. And I think it's not so much a matter of whether we have evidence that this particular process has worked here as more of a meta vision that if we don't do this kind of process, we're going to find ourselves always wondering what the next 3 to 5 years is to bring.
And we can give you the specific names of the companies if you like NEC and some other companies. We can talk in private about that.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
You're the White House.
It worked, it worked.
All right. And now for group number 1. Who is the champion of group number 1? We'll let you select your choice.
I like blue.
You like blue?
Although I should take red. Okay. Technically, how do I position this?
Just put it down there and leave it alone and he'll aim on it.
Okay. Thank you. What we're going to do today is give you a insight as to how we think the corporation is Logitech, I don't even know the name, Logitech, will be growing for success within the foreseeable future. I call this Vision 2000 Plus, taking liberties, Luigi, the company. The basic scenario we're in today is that Logitech is a successful company growing at a significant revenue growth per year, and with growth comes some additional problems. We started out as a corporation with a single product and have evolved to a series of products. And so we're starting to observe and have some fears of the effects of that growth. So the specific problem is the success and growth we've had requires some altered processes and in terms of the corporate culture and operational techniques and tools in order to continue to be successful in the future. The observation and built fear we see we're not really building on the successes of the past, and that worries us. We want to be able to be positioned to be in a growth environment and build upon past successes. So we've observed less collaboration between functional organizations. We're very spread out. We're geographically worldwide. We have organizations, both R&D and manufacturing, in here locally in California, in Ireland, Switzerland, Taiwan, and someplace else where I forgot. And within those organizations, again, less collaboration. We see more internal competition within each other. That worries us a little bit. And duplication of efforts. People are solving the same problems in different ways. And we have a fear that in the future that's going to give us reduced success. We're not going to be able to maintain the profits we're accumulating now. Our margins will probably go up because fixed costs will go up. It worries us. And so what we're going to do today is propose a structure in order to deal with this problem so we can be in proper position for the future. And indeed, that is the goal of what we're going to talk about here today. The evolution of our corporate culture and the evolution of the operational processes so we're properly positioned for continued success and growth in, within our own development. And by development, that's the big D. That's not just engineering. Marketing does development, sales does development, customer services does development. We need a human resources organization. Facilities have to be positioned for growth. This is a significant problem. It goes beyond current product development. So, but the proposal here today is going to be a little more focused because we can't tackle the entire corporation, right? So what we need to do is focus in on one particular area, see how that works, and then try to evolve that throughout the rest of the corporation. And so the significant area we're worried about, of course, is product development, because we're now developing multiple products consisting of organizations all trying to work together. So the proposal is for formation of a collaborative success team. Proposal right now is a small team, 7 to 10 people, and we'll adjust that as time goes on, probably with a full-time facilitator. That may help. It's important to note that the team ought to be made up of both cross-functional and cross-geographical representatives, because we want to build on the successes of the past, but we also want to know not only what succeeded, but what failed. And not necessarily to change, but to evolve. And evolution is real important. We want to just change everything all at the same time. That might be a little too radical. We got to continue to make money, make the payroll, things like that. Right? We also assume that this team is a very high-level team made up of senior managers and/or contributors. Not limited to management, but also senior-level contributors who've had direct experience in the past. Probably not somebody new, but somebody who's been through a whole product cycle. Maybe somebody who has been relatively new, but not with the company the whole time, but maybe also somebody, who have been the company over the long term and watched the evolution. In other words, benefiting from the experience. So this team also is high enough, and it should be empowered to form what we call these B teams. And the B teams are more working process teams. And they would do such thing as data gathering, more direct, low-level experience from the individual groups, again, geographical and functional. They would do process development. They would do prototyping of these processes. They would do requirements gathering, both up and down, both to the functional organizations themselves and back up to this higher-level C team. And it's very key to note, and not of a functional member, but of the A team functional members. Right? People who have had actual working experience at the lower level in order to do this. And it's real important to note that these B teams work directly with the functional groups. Okay? So the objective here of the whole structure, and most notably the C team, they're ultimately responsible for the success of this proposal, is to identify first and foremost a pilot project. We're recommending that we consider a new product. Let's start from scratch, do it right the first time, see how that goes. You know, almost not really prototyping, because this is going to go out to the marketplace and make us money, and then evolve the processes across the organization. So we're suggesting pick a new product in development, include in the budget cycle the cost associated with running the structure, figure that into that new product's development. Okay? Objectives specifically, then define the knowledge base of information throughout the corporation that's going to help us evolve. And that also includes identifying the methods for capturing data, building the knowledge base, and how to utilize that data. And directly applicable to that, and in addition, is also to identify the required tools, the skill sets necessary, the training necessary to make this happen, and then the communications capabilities for all the organizations within the development cycle. We expect the structure to both develop and evolve development processes. Again, not going from scratch, but evolving what we've had in the past. But we also suspect we'll have to develop new processes. And very important to the last two, establish key indicators for success and the measurement processes associated with that. And that's in two forms. One is the task force, or the structure itself. How do we measure the success of the task force? We have these objectives. Let's establish some criteria for measuring these objectives, but also product development and the pilot project. And we also think we ought to, I made this up, team, you haven't seen this. We also think we ought to compare by benchmarking with other organizations. Let's build upon the experience of others. It could even be competitors. Right? But let's go to other companies, and most companies are not afraid to talk about their experiences. Let's see how they've done and benchmark ourselves against them. Okay? So that's the proposal. I want your concurrence on starting this up. We think this is the proper method and reasonable method to position ourselves well for the future.
What kind of resources do you think this is going to take?
Well, in addition to the management team, we've got to get concurrence from you guys, functional organizations, to designate some of your senior people to work on this team. I suspect the team will be in existence very full-time for a good 3 months or so in order to get things rolling. After that, it's probably a 20 to 30% part of their time. Of course, the geographical differences, we'd have to work out the communication methodologies, video conferencing versus travel. And I think after that, it ought to be the start of the corporate culture that says the people involved in product development, this becomes part of their job. And that's why we suggest that we include in the project budget for the pilot the time associated with doing this, because that's how it's going to be for the future. Now, as time goes on, it'll get a little more efficient. We suspect costs will go down. So we'll probably need some capital also to build knowledge bases for computer resources, video, communication links, things like that. Yet to determine. We want to get the first step of concurrence to this before we go off and do some more detailed financial analysis.
Scott, we've had year after year of 30, 40, 60% revenue growth. What's the problem? I mean, why fix things if they're not broken?
Well, they're getting broken.
They are?
They're getting broken. Again, we said observation. Observation has said we've gotten feedback from other...
Why didn't we know about this before?
Well, this is the evolution. Now we're doing what you paid us to do. We're reporting what happened. We've got success. The most recent product we went through, we just got out. Profit margins were down. They weren't as high as they should have been. The gross margins were down. It's fixed costs. We did some analysis. We did some post-mortem. We figured out, hey, guys, we're competing against each other, duplicating efforts. Here's the results. It's probably positive we're doing this now. We feel this is a very proactive approach rather than totally reactive. We're still making money. I think that's good news.
Scott, what's the process by which you guys recommended a initial team size of 7 to 10? Why is that a key?
Well, that's an initial suggestion. I mean, there's a feeling that small teams with high-powered people, empowered people, probably are a little more efficient to getting things going. And it's got to be the right team. Now, recall, suggestion was cross-functional, cross-geographic. So if it becomes more than 10, if that's appropriate, it could be more than 10. First cut estimation of what's efficient. That's all that was.
Could you say a little bit more on how this initial team would leverage what they are doing immediately to the rest of the company?
Well, it seems to me that this is part of their job. They're in these organizations. They've got to go and do development of new product anyway, right? And again, include their time within a budget. It's going to be a little more upfront cost, 2 steps backward, but 5 steps forward eventually. So I don't think this is outside the normal scheme of their positions and their responsibilities today. It's just an evolution of that.
I know the CEO must catch a flight, and so I'm wondering if he has something he would like to say as we wrap up this meeting. Are you deferring?
I'll also give my team the opportunity to chime in. It's probably for me to know what's going on here.
Well, since I report to the stockholders, I would sort of like to hear what the stockholders have to say.
All right.
Well, why not leave him on the stool here while we have the
okay.
stockholders come?
It really is hot under this.
Now we just have a switch here in the setting and a transformation of characters. I could toss out a few hats here and see if we let some of you stockholders, would you care to respond to or comment on any of the proposals? However, before we do that, I'm wondering, I know you have some other things that you want to get to, and I'm wondering if you want to comment on these proposals or if you didn't want to switch to another set of comments in terms of some of the
I'd like to stay on.
C community sort of thing.
I'd like to, in the next half hour or so, really talk about C community things, and the comment would be sort of, for a while I'd like to hear what people thought about how much strategy they've heard.
Okay. I think what you just said changes something from what we originally heard the question as. And your question was what kind of strategy did we hear, and how does it...
Well, how much strategy?
How much strategy and relative to a C community, right?
Well, we may not have made it clear when we gave the mission out for these committees, but it was just sort of assume that what we did is this group decided, it's a complex issue about how we hear all about quality and all that changes. Let's get a smart committee and have them come back with a strategic plan. We want to talk at a strategic level. So there were some interesting mixes of strategic and tactical brought up. And so it'd just be interesting to say, well, what did they hear that was about strategy, or what could they contribute about strategy if they were going to comment?
Would any of the stockholders care to comment at this point in time?
Scott, that was good. Can you tell me what we do about these computers that we've already bought? I mean, 2 years ago you came up.
Now, we don't want to talk specifically about any proposals. I think we want to now jump up to a meta level.
I would mind some
and
feedback.
talk about the process.
I said, would mind some feedback.
In other words, did you hear any strategy from the group of proposals rather than talk proposal one proposal? Right. Because we could talk about some more. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, it's I removed the hat to make sure.
Let's go back to the audience.
Okay, it was dealing with two issues that I thought. One was that there were some other projects that are going to compete with this bootstrap effort in the company, and how, as the CEO, we can assess those, that what are their relative merits. And secondly, because of the investments we've already made, how are we going to integrate this into our strategies?
Yes.
Well, I thought the presentations fairly well expressed a vision of where you were going. What I didn't sense was a rooting in the foundation of where you were starting from. What are your current strengths? What are your current weaknesses? Where are you positioned and where are you not positioned? And then comparing or contrasting the vision with where you are today, what are the strategic initiatives? What are the pressure points, the leveraging points that are going to accelerate you toward that vision most effectively? And in particular, implementation strategies were missing. For instance, what are you going to deal with corporate culture barriers? Some of the things you're suggesting run very counter to the, let's say, the sense of well-being of certain segments of our corporations. How are you going to target the areas of least resistance that also offer the areas of greatest opportunity? And where there are barriers, what specific strategies do you have to overcome them? Get over them, around them, through them, and so forth.
Are there some other comments that you would like to make relative to this?
I'd like just to introduce
yes.
something that if we, oh, this is supposed to be live. Thanks. The use of the word strategy and tactics, etc., like that one can have a strategy about how to get home from here or something of that sort. But if you're talking about the whole business of a corporation having to become a much more capable outfit, and then you say this at that level of a challenge, then strategy has to be something different from, well, what's our market approach today or something of that sort. So the strategy by which we invest over the coming years in improving our corporation, that's kind of the level that I'm interested in hearing what people's thoughts are about that. So if executive committee chartered a committee to come back and say, hey, give us the starting kickoff for how we would deal with this at a strategic orientation, and that's what I think would be very interesting to have the discussions, like what was there that you saw, and what would be missing that you saw, what kind of comments.
I'd like to share something too that I find very useful in looking at some of these things, and that's the concept of single loop and double loop learning. In single loop learning, you are learning how to reach a goal, and that can be improvement, and that's what a lot of the TQM is. You've got goals, you've got criteria, measurements, but you're going for what you know, and you're just assuming that everything is fine. In double loop learning, you are questioning whether the goal is where you want to be. You're looking at the underlying assumptions. You know, you're reassessing purpose. And I think that that's one of the things when we're looking at at improvement for capability, we have to begin to look at the ability to not just learn from experience, but learning from experience, how do we then make decisions about where we go from there. And there's one other level that Gregory Bateson shares with us about learning, and that's where you then learn how to do that kind of learning. And that's very much aligned with the whole Bootstrap idea, because you're talking about getting at a meta level of learning about strategizing. So I heard some learning how to get, how to improve how we get where we want to go, but the strategy, the delta in terms of, do we really want to go there? Is that what will take us to the future? Is some of the questions that we need to address.
I think that the implied strategic thinking that I saw in most of the presentations was at least one strategic concept was start small, become successful, and grow from there as a way for seeding the learning capability in the organization and then growing from there. Probably the only strategic one that was common.
I think that maybe we're at a stage where maybe strategy is premature in certain respects. Maybe especially in terms of your double loop, it seems to me that we need a tactic to get strategic thinking better accepted in respect of what we're trying to do here. And then once that tactic works, then you can start implementing the more strategic approach.
That sounds like a strategy to me.
Then it's semantics at that point.
You're going to start taking this island tactically, but you're doing that because that's the way to something else. But anyway, if we took it, though, instead of starting off with all the worries and stuff, if an executive committee said, bring us a strategic plan, then it seemed, if that's what the case, then one would say, send you back to the drawing board with your group. But it probably wasn't clear that the mission was that. But if it was saying, come with a strategic plan, we don't want to hear that, oh, you're going to start a bunch of skunk works so that you can verify enough so you come back in a couple of years and show us numbers. We said, well, wait a minute, we're asking for a strategic plan for the corporation that we buy at this level as a strategic plan. And so this wouldn't be the way I'd like to hear it. Sort of like your teenage kids saying, well, we'll tell you later what we're going to do with something.
Is this on? What I think maybe is really missing your example, Doug, about I can have a strategy for going home, assumes that you have in mind a vision of where you want to go. When you said there was vision at the tactical level. But I don't hear a consensus in the room about what a vision of a really capable organization would look like. And I can't develop a strategic plan for arriving at a capable organization if I don't have some kind of shared sense of what is it I'm trying to reach.
Great. So you'd say, strategically, we better develop a vision.
That's right. Before you start doing any planning.
Well, I mean, you got to make a plan to set up the vision, but that means there's stages in all of this. And at an early stage, we have to cultivate an appropriate vision. A vision that you can say is strategic, that we can buy into. So how are we going to go about doing that?
Okay, yeah, now we're talking about the strategy for developing a strategic plan.
If someone came to me with your point of view and told me, well, we can't really set up a strategic plan until we have a vision, and we says, hey, wait a minute. The basic thing was our organization has to be a lot more capable to face the future. We want a strategy for doing it. One of the important strategic elements is a vision. Well, you start out with a cloudy one that gets in the right direction and start refining it as part of your strategic activity. How are you going to know? Do you do that for 10 years or?
Yeah, I guess I never heard everybody really understanding that first statement of what we want is a more capable organization.
Yeah, I feel that we were trying to print it out. We found out that with our certain computer thing, we couldn't get anything printed out. So, sorry that we didn't do right by you. I'll blame it on my vice presidents.
Interestingly, though, when we start either an organization or working within an organization, we don't think of a strategy of an organization first. We just have a certain picture or an image or a vision. And when that vision becomes compelling enough, then you develop a strategy to implement that vision in reality and bring it into reality. So it is not necessarily about strategy of strategizing, but it is about something which is pulling forward, pulling forth. So, I'm seeing that it might not just be a strategy of a technology or cognitively understanding or thinking about it, but passionately getting involved in something which is pulling you forward.
So what are you describing, the first stage to develop a strategy, or what?
Doug, I just want to let you know that what you are saying is a languaging after something has happened. But what I'm talking about is how do you create that gap between the current reality and the vision. Then you can talk about how do you walk into that gap or walk in through that gap is a strategy. But this is not a strategy about a strategy. It is about, first of all, having something to look at.
Because I could put too many interpretations of what you're saying. So if we say there's an organization that it's kind of clear that they feel from a top level they have to get more capable and competent, and they've isolated some of the particulars, but say we need to do something about that. And we don't want to just go around fixing spots. We want a framework, a way to strategy for investing in this. So that's the request.
I agree with you, but many organizations attempted. For example, when I was in Apple, we created something called a new enterprise project, where about 300 people, actually 120 we ended up with. But it doesn't necessarily end up in something because...
I don't know what you're objecting to or something, see, or what you're proposing. I was trying to state the situation. I'd like to have you say in there, oh, if there's a vision needed, are you trying to say that not until you get the vision can you talk about strategy? Where, if somebody says a case like they did for Logitech here, at what point are you saying you can rightfully talk about strategy? That's what's confusing to me.
I'll tell you. My sense is at this moment we need to have a collective vision. We need to have a collective imagery, something which we can identify with. If we even have an understanding of what that would be, then we can think about strategizing how to get there. At this moment, I don't see that we are there.
So I think what you're proposing is that people should say, we need to develop a vision of where we're going to go. We know that where we are and the course we're taking isn't very good, and it's leading to trouble, so we have to get a better course, and we have to have a vision for it. So strategically, that's a very first important sort of thing to develop. So would you say that that's thinking at a strategic level? And then you'd like to say, how do we develop that vision?
At that moment, I would say even language becomes a barrier. Any language, whether you use strategy or any of them, it becomes, we need to work with where people are at this moment, rather than afterwards you can think about it as a strategy.
I just want to comment that I pick up here. I think what is pretty obvious is we're really talking about a recursive phenomenon. What is strategic at one level is tactical at another, so it depends where we're viewing. And so that's where some of our conflict is coming from over this. The thing that, though, is very clear, I think, the process of visioning itself is very distinct. It's distinctly different than the process of strategy, which is essentially a focusing strategy. In the simplest level, you might look at strategy equals vision minus where you are today. Okay, and the visioning is a very creative process.
I want to get up at 12,000 feet, and I'm only at 6. That's the difference between where I want to be and where I am. That's not strategy. It's just
I'm saying the strategy, the strategy comes out of that differential and how you design how you're going to get from where you are to where you want to be.
Something's very confusing. What do you, if you say, I want a long-term framework that deals with a whole problem and not lots of little bitty solutions, what do you ask for then if you say if it's not a strategic framework? In some place in that framework of process, you need to get a clearer and clearer vision of what's ahead and how you're going to do there? Do you isolate and take away that vision producing and say that's not part of a strategic approach? That's what I'm confused about. You almost say that you can't have strategy until you have a vision. Well, what's the larger process about saying I have to establish a strategy and evolve a vision? You know, establish a vision and evolve a strategy.
Doug, may I suggest, I think we are getting caught up in wordsmithing that we really are not going to make much progress on, and we have about 40 minutes left. And I do think that something has happened to those of us who've been here. I think people have gotten a glimpse of a vision from whatever other level they're trying to then pull it into themselves and to their organizations, and that they will leave with a different perspective on that future. And I thought we would like to take some time to do two things now. One would be to share some of the things that have come out in terms of the insights and the way in which you will use some of those insights and futures in your organization. We also, Jim Mulvaney is here, and we also want to share with you some of the things that some of us are doing.
Why don't I suggest that we make a close to this process and we just
right. Okay. And then we'll share and then talk about how we can perhaps support each other as we move ahead. So are you ready to move to that?
I'm not through talking for the next 2 hours or 2 days. But anyway, let's do this change.
Thank you very much. We'll run the credits after this for all of you, and we appreciate those of you who took on hats, some of your own making. And thank you, Prasad, for the hats.
I'd just like to make a comment on this whole process, which is really interesting in the context of what we've been talking about for the last couple of days about open hyperdoc systems and stuff. That this whole conversation was a kind of cyclical redefining what we were trying to do, and that it would suggest to me that there's a real potential there that this kind of dialogue goes on with this system and creates a kind of clarity and a common focusing over time, and then that adds to the database and gets put in there, and this is a sort of real-time demonstration of what could happen over an extended period of time and over large geography with this kind of system.
I also want to comment that whenever you go into a simulation, it isn't the product of that particular effort that is the measure of the learning that comes out of the interaction. And I hope that all of you felt that you had a chance to wrestle with some of the issues and integrate in a different way some of the learning that you have, and also get an appreciation for the the wide variety of challenges that people have.
Personally, the benefit of this exercise was out there at the round table. I think that to be beneficial in here, the goal was not that clear. I think I personally gained a lot of insight in the discussion out there, and there wasn't enough of a focus for us to be able to present something or to get into the definition or the understanding of the words here. So I felt that what we were doing up here was flapping our jaws to a certain extent and getting frustrated because we were not able to communicate.
Well, I actually found something from this that I think was a sort of a second-order double-loop learning, and that is that you need to learn how to be as a group in order to produce a product. And one of that, I've had this feeling over the 3 days of the session, is that one of the things that I think would make this process more effective is if groups of us had more and more of this kind of time to work as a group so that we can see what that process is like, because the whole goal in this kind of collaborative business from the human side is to be able to collaborate at all.
I mean, you know, just having technology, we've already seen that that doesn't solve the problem. So the learning that came out for me was how hard it is to learn to be a group spontaneously by being thrown together in a situation. If that was a good outcome, then that's perfectly.
On what you had learned kind of after the first day, you might want to turn and revisit that. And I want to give you the next 5 minutes for you to jot down notes to yourself somewhere in your notes toward the end or the beginning of what you see as the significant insights that you want to carry out of this conference and that you will share with others. And then we're going to ask you if you will share some of those with the group. But I want to give you a few minutes to make a transition and to reflect on that before we begin the sharing. It was at end of D that we... I'd like to bring us all back together again. I think a few people will be rejoining us in a minute, but we'll go ahead and begin anyway. You've invested three days, and we've invested them both with Doug and with each other. And I hope that within that period of time, you've also had some time away from the kinds of things that press you every day to get a little bit of future vision for yourself. One of the interesting things that came up in a discussion at noontime was one of the participants shared the fact that someone else in the organization had been to the seminar in the past, and she could see the reflection of the learning in things that had developed in the workplace over the past year. So it's always good to see both those things that may be long and strategic, or those things that are strategic for, you know, a particular work group. There are many different levels to the system. Who would like to begin by sharing a little bit of what these 3 days have meant and what you will be able to take away from here? This is nothing. I mean, it can be, yeah.
I think I look back here at what I had written down, and it's hard to select one thing, but the metaphor of the computer bootstrap as a way of bootstrapping an organization, I think, is something that caused me to reflect. And I went back to my early days where to get a computer going, you toggled in the bootstrap loader to be able to even get it going. And that was a very hands-on type experience. And I think I'll be paying more attention to the human system and more hands-on in that regard. So I think that metaphor helped me a lot at seeing how you start small and you build up. And I think that's the one that'll stick with me.
Microphone.
I think connected to that, I also feel how important the human system considerations are. I think we tend to focus on the technical, and as I said yesterday, the concept of the paradigm of the document as being a barrier to creative thinking and expanding our thinking was a key insight for me, and beginning to get a feel for what the barriers to doing this kind of thing are, as far as how adults learn, the changes that will be required in organizational relationships. Those kinds of things, I think, are what are going to be key. Technology, it seems to me, is more straightforward in a sense than the human aspects. So that's what I take back.
Thank you. Yes.
I think I had the belief that I came in with, that the human system is really, really critical to the success of any of the other systems. I had that reinforced. The newer thing is that I don't consider myself a very strategic person. Happily, I work for somebody who's a strategic person, and I can see that I need to learn more about strategy and its role in our success.
Just a small comment, Maggie.
Yes.
That is one of the most important human system elements, I think, came out in this afternoon's discussion, which is just how nothing starts unless the implementer or the champion of whatever good idea is going into an organization. The human side of his ability to persuade, to define, to motivate, to sell is probably going to be the first kind of gating milestone for any of these proposals. And that's just came out real clear in this afternoon's discussions.
Yeah, I'd like to add too that I think that for me, the approach here of really looking at the fundamentals of what we consider a lot of times on a day-to-day basis has been real valuable. It's sort of going back and looking at how do we do work, what is the strategies that are available from a very fundamental point of view, which is what I think we got out of, or at least that's what I got out of these 3 days. It was very, very beneficial and will help me to help others rethink that same question back where I work.
They're just two short comments. One is that thinking is a habit, And unless you get into the habit of thinking this way, it's very, very hard to do it. And so it's got to be something that has to be cultivated. It's thinking. Is that better? Okay. You have to get into a habit of thinking, and that kind of thing has to be cultivated either in the organization or a long time before. You can't just suddenly land into a situation and suddenly start thinking anew if you've never been used to thinking that way. You might get an insight, but you won't do it. And I think the other thing is that there are a lot of beliefs and value systems underneath all this stuff, which kind of, if you can't get a hold of those in the first place, I don't even think you can get to the point of making use of the rest of this. So it's a new, I guess it's a new way of looking at things, and it tends to be isolated to individuals too much, and it needs to be done much more in a group. That's the only way you're going to get at it. So.
There's two things that I think I really got out of this that I think are of special significance. One is the whole notion of a high-performance organization. And I think that rather than starting off by getting bogged down into, strategic approaches and A, B, and C and all this kind of thing, the notion of a high-performance organization being an organization that can capture and use the information and the knowledge at its disposal is really the key point. And I think that's a very important notion that I'll be bringing back with me. The notion related to that a lot of knowledge and information gets lost, knowledge that could be important. Related to that, therefore, is the notion also that the C activity is what can make an organization high performance. But there's a key issue there that I'd just like to mention, and that is that for C activity to exist, you have to have B activity. And it's been an assumption all along that B activity exists, and I don't think that's a correct assumption. Not only must it exist, but it must be well defined, it must be well understood.
Let me just say that's what C is for. If it's not there, something has to create it. What would create it other than the C? So
right.
Anyway.
But that is I think an important point.
Are there some others who'd like to share? Yes.
Well, I have more of a question than a comment, and I would like you to ask. I'm pressing, but it doesn't work, I guess. I would like to ask Doug for his comment. Out of these 3 days and many other conversations with Doug, certainly something that comes out very strong is a compelling vision of what should be this what you have called a high-performance organization, or an organization able to improve itself. This is very strong. I would say it's very clear. Now, how you do that, it's the difficult part. We have been shown many things, many pieces, and somehow I have always had the impression that what you were saying all along was, well, it's not that you can expect that a product will be available or one decision can be made which is good for everyone. It's really a personal thing. You said that the community of users have to get together and find what is right, what is the right way to implement this vision. It would appear that in reality what we should take out of these 3 days is that to have this vision and to have it as really a burning desire to make it happen is really the most important thing, and in some sense the only important thing. And if you really are believers, then we'll discover the way. I mean, how off the target am I? That's
I'd hope there are other elements of it. It's like if you have a burning desire and an image that, a fairly high certainty that there's something there to pursue, then you start saying, how do I pursue it? It's very complicated. And you start looking for whatever strategies, I'd say, of how you best can get there. And that's what these 6 sort of things put together are saying, well, there is a framework with these things in it that looks like it would really make a best way to go. And so...
But yet, again, excuse me if I insist, but well, I have the impression that you don't put the things in a way of a recipe. You don't say you need to have this, you need to have this, you need to have this. You leave it a lot up to the organization.
Well, I don't think anybody knows enough about that frontier to make a prescription for where you want to end up. So, the best thing I could see would be, how do you get a process, essentially, how do you get better at hill climbing, or better at making a map out there and navigating and working your way through it? Because it's a, you know, we don't have enough experience about coping with fast change or organizations to just prescribe what the solution is. So the best thing you do that I could see is look for a good strategy for how you pursue it, how you trying to make it a clear and clear picture about where out there in that frontier you want to be and how you're going to get there. So it's improving your vision and improving your mobility, and anyway, that's the strategy.
There is a certain paradigm shift even in the pursuit of learning here. The notion that we've had so much in the past about change has been that we are pursuing a goal, and even though we it may be a ways off, it's something we define and we work back from that. There's an emerging need, particularly for the longest term of perspectives, to move out in a way in which you're going in a direction and you have a vision, but there's a heuristic about the way you pursue it, and you're not trying to pre-map everything. You're having to do some of that mapping as you go out into the unexplored territory. We really are exploring more unknowns. In the past, we've had enough time to kind of learn from experience, and most of us have worked off of other people's maps. Now more of us are having to map as we go and share. And I think that part of our difficulty in trying to figure out how to describe and even develop a strategy is there is a subtle shift from what was a lot of strategic planning in the past and what that meant to corporations and how they thought of strategic planning, and the kind of strategy that we're talking about here, which is in the pursuit of a capability. It's not that it's fuzzy all the time, but it's that there is a continual reiterative loop that helps gain clarity and also revisits assumptions so that there may be some major shifts at some point in time. And it's this notion of learning and yet at the same time revisiting the assumptions that helps you keep the flexibility and the openness to all of the factors that are affecting you in the environment. It's a subtle shift, but there is some difference in the way you go about planning in that mode. I want to have Jim Mulvaney share with you something that is evolved here in the Bay Area among some of us who have been graduates of the seminar in the past and who share this vision with a great deal of passion and who wanting to help each other as we try to define what we can do in our respective workplaces.
Thanks, Margaret. Well, how many of you sitting out there have found that one of the greatest values you've gotten from being here is getting to know one another? Just raise your hand if you feel that way. Well, that was a feeling very much like I had when I was in your place close to 2 years ago. And I had a combination of feeling very inspired and that there was a very clear vision here to pursue. And at the same time, I was very vague as to what my next steps were. What were the specific things I was going to do next. And all I knew was that somehow I wanted to keep the feeling and the spirit that I experienced here going in some way. and that if I could do that, I would eventually benefit from some specific things coming out of that that I could apply in my career, in my work, at the company I work for, and so forth. And that's really what the Bootstrap Forum is about. First and foremost, it's about relationship. And therefore, I'd like to start by introducing some of the members of the forum who are here today. So would all of you stand up? They didn't know I was going to do this. So now this is a motley band of folks who have been meeting on the order of at least once a month for the last, I guess, 6 or 8 months. Yeah, 6 or 8 months. And one of the things that I want to share with you today is the kind of focus that has really been co-evolved by this group meeting periodically. Several of the things that we found to be very valuable are the following. First of all, the ability to network with one another and to get to know one another better, what we're working on professionally, and what that has to do with what each of us is doing. So how we might actually collaborate. So the community is fundamentally a collaborative community. And this happens during the formal meetings as well as outside of those meetings electronically. And I'll describe that mode of our interaction in just a bit. And also in small clusters and groups, one-on-one. I've had probably several lunches with most of the people who are attending the Bootstrap Forum. And in some, over the last several months, I can tell you that my knowing these people has enhanced me professionally and also in terms of my vision and where I intend to go. And I have the feeling that I'll continue to be in relationship with everyone here regardless of whatever particular job I'm in at the moment. This is clearly something that transcends, I think, what any of us happen to be involved with today. So there's that sense of evolving something new and different with one another, because this whole area that we're talking about, knowledge creation and integration and application and the whole group area of computer-supported group work is very new. The models out there do not exist. There are a few emerging technologies, and there's very little knowledge about how does one apply these technologies, and what about the human side of the organization. So these are the areas that, inspired by Doug's concepts in bootstrapping, have been an ongoing theme of the Bootstrap Forum. So some of the things we do at our meetings, for instance, is we'll share with one another what we're involved in, what we've just read about, the book we read, the conference we attended, something that's coming up, an event in the future, a software or hardware product that we've heard about, projects that we're involved with as consultants or as end-user organizations and so forth. And that's very free form. Do you have a comment, Prasad? So that's one of the things we do. Another thing is to actually take a look at specific products. We've had a number of vendors come in. You saw Thinker today, right? Well, a couple of months ago we had Thinker demonstrated, and we thought that was such a great tool that we ourselves wanted to experience what it was like to deal with a hyper document rather than some of the structured idea processing tools that we had been using in our meetings. So the next meeting we set it up so that we use this hyperdocument tool to facilitate our meeting. And we were able to directly experience the many distinctions, significant distinctions that there are between that previous technology we were using and something like Thinker. So we do fun things like that also, actually try to apply the software tools that we're seeing. Another thing that we've done is to have case study presentations. One of them is EPRI's own strategic project called EPRINet. And there the focus is perhaps a little less on the technology and more on what are the barriers you come up against when you try to introduce this kind of groupware concept. What are the strategies that have been effective or not effective in pursuing the vision of that implementation. So that gives a rundown on the meetings themselves. Prasad, do you want to add something in here?
A couple more things was, it was a true community which came right out of Doug's vision. We were living that collaborative community, and interestingly when we recently talked about why are people coming, should we create a project or something else, people resisted that. They said the value by coming to those meetings and bootstrapping with other people itself was much more valuable, and it was helping our organizations and our work much more efficiently than creating a project. And we also wanted to add something like a subgroup, SIGs, And we have been thinking about having a conference, which you might want to know and also support or participate in any way, where it is not just Doug presenting, but creating a bootstrapping conference or some kind of a conference where various people can come and actually they can bring some projects which they are working on, or they can bring some papers, some thinking which they have at this moment, and network, collaborate, create sessions where they can go through over 3 days or 4 days, where they can go through something, come with something which is meaningful there, both in technology as well as in the human aspects of it. So where we can go away, and we might even be able to produce electronic conference and some of that, and produce a document, a proceedings or a book which can come at the end of the workshop or at the end of the conference. If any of you can support that, and if any of you are willing to participate in that, and if your company can support some way of funding it, or proceedings to be printed, or any other type of things, please contact Jim or me or Doug. In any sense, we are really looking at putting together something which can emerge out of all of us, rather than something which goes into one particular vision. So that's what I have to say.
I want to say just a few things about what distinguishes this group, this forum group, from just about any other group that I could belong to. And here it's very key to understand that the group is totally inspired or comes from Doug's basic concepts of bootstrapping. Recently, a core of the Bootstrap Forum, maybe about 5 of us, have been meeting to define some particular mission for the Bootstrap Forum itself. What's really our focus? Where do we want to go as this informal community? And one thing we realized very strongly that we had very much in common, and that was an intention to support and facilitate and promulgate in any way that we could Doug's bootstrapping vision, or any aspects of it, out in the world. In our companies, in the clients that we were working with, and so forth. And so this is something that really is a fundamental animating purpose, if you will, for this community that's collected. So Doug's vision forms a catalytic ingredient in what we see happening. What I like about the forum is that it fills some of the gap for me between the concept and the vision and the practical application. And I just want to give you 1 or 2 rather mundane, pragmatic ways in which I've benefited from my affiliation with the forum. One of the things I struggled with after attending my first seminar was, well, in what ways could I bring this to EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute? I think you've heard a little bit about the institute down the road here. And on one hand, this is a very decentralized organization. There's no strong top-down kind of culture there where you can reach the CEO or the president and expect it to somehow filter down through the institute. It's a very much endpoint, grassroots kind of culture. One of the things I've been able to do is to develop what I call an interest group. We call it an organizational learning interest group, which is about 35 or 40 people, including the president and a number of executives, as well as the project managers throughout the institute, who are interested in that particular area. And I hardly do more than occasionally forward an electronic announcement or message that I'm getting from the Bootstrap community, and just forwarding it to these folks out in the institute. In a short amount of time, sort of a snowballing effect has occurred, in that there's been a raising of consciousness, an increase in interest, and specifically interest in some seminars. And at this point, Doug was our first seminar giver. He gave a 2-hour seminar on bootstrapping into the 21st century, and it really reached a number of the project managers who came there. Out of that, we had the opportunity for EPRI to fund the revival of Augment. You saw the system today, and one of the things that we're interested in is the fundamental functionality and architecture of Augment, even though it's on an antiquated platform, is quite interesting to us, and we want to see how we can learn from that and introduce it into some of the EPRI products. So there was a specific result that came out of this kind of networking. So I want to just close by saying, if you see that there may be some value in your continued participation with what I'll call the bootstrapping community, make sure you've left a email, preferably, because we do mostly electronic mail communications, that we can reach you with announcements of upcoming meetings, or you can get the kinds of announcements of events and so forth in which you may be interested. So let me invite any of the other forum members and anyone who has a question to just ask that now. April 24th from 3 to 5 p.m. at EPRI, yes.
Jim?
Thank you, Jim.
Oh, just a short one.
Yes.
I was wondering, since we have a lot of people here who are from the East Coast, there might be some interest in forming some group back east, because obviously you won't get to come here every time. So I just throw that in the air and see if anybody buys in.
Is anyone interested in exploring an East Coast chapter of the forum? Okay, then see Mark then after the meeting closes. Thanks.
And right, and you have the opportunity by electronic mail to make some connections. Great. Well, I want to thank all of you for your participation, and we want to give Doug the last few minutes to wrap up for today. I know that there are some questions that didn't get answered, and I'm sure if you'll stay afterward or if you'll address those to Doug or to the group via email. One of the nice things about both the system we're talking about and some of the systems that we have in place, at least through Internet, is this ability to continue to be an active living community even when we're not in physical proximity, although it of course is great to have the face-to-face opportunities that let us forge some new relationships. So pardon?
Phone calls, one more way.
Well, that's true, that's true.
That's one of the problems with talking and designing strategies is until there are tactical activities, it's a little hard to start a strategy working. So I find myself spinning like this. And the thing we almost started a year ago was very exciting, but it was a lesson too that there has to be some more fundamental tactical activities going on that are oriented enough to be saying, look, you start to realize that there are strategic issues that need to be established in all of this. So that the big challenge for us, Christine and me and Mary, etc., and with the support of the Bootstrap Forum, is sort of how to get something moving. And the evidence seems to be piling up that if something nucleates someplace past a certain point, it'll really start happening. And as far as I can gather it, it would really mean that there's something bootstrapping about the activity where the kind of core activity gets going is getting better at doing what it's trying to do, to being a core activity. So this is an instinct, as much as my planning and thinking can go, so that the emergence of some means by which the group can collectively start getting better at collectively integrating its knowledge. And then at some point there really is, it's almost like trying to start a fire. And there's a matter of scaling about that. I lived right in the edge of the rainy fir forests in Oregon for many years. My brother and I, that our idea of fun on a rainy Saturday afternoon was each to take one match and a pocket knife and go out and start a fire in there like that. So you learned a lot. And so yes, you can get a match lit, but unless you protect the heat that it's going and find some other things to get burned, it just won't take off. So there's a critical mass of flame that it takes in a given kind of damp and cold environment before you can just start piling things on and getting it go. And it's the question then about how to sort of establish some kind of a protected environment in which that can start. And so someplace, that needs an organization or set of them that have enough resources to sort of make enough heat get started and shepherd, shield flame and add the fuel and get going. So the best in the meantime then is to start people thinking and moving and asking the questions within the organizations that if we don't have a really coherent improvement process, then the main thing that we have to do is start getting a process to establish and prove that, which is a C. So it comes back time and again to trying to get C alive within organizations and between them. So that's just all. So anyway, it's been fun talking with you and looking out and saying, hey, it's fun for a few days to pretend like we have a C community. See? And it would be nice to stay in touch. So we will be in communication with when everything happens, and there are going to be a growing number of people that that it's kind of clear that if something happens, and one of the chief things is if there becomes available a really effective prototype hyperdocument system and methodology associated with sort of supporting primary core community of some kind, that seemed to me the kind of a thing that could get it launched. So we'll put you on a list to let you know, and for further things like this. And another thing is that there's a year ago the people in the seminar did bring up the question that saying, hey, a follow-on kind of getting together that is more real sharing and a real focusing on the bootstrapping. And I would only add that in most such conferences there's sort of a committee that passes on whether or not somebody who wants to give a paper or talk can do it. So I'd like to be in there and says, you know, it's got to have some kind of element of bootstrapping in it. See, there are getting lots of meetings now about collaboration and organizational learning or something, but the only one that makes sense in a bootstrapping sense is, hey, are we talking about the leverage factor, the strategic leverage factor in there that can be able to do it, or focusing on Kodiak with the orientation about its importance would be an initial starting place like that. Otherwise, it still would be fun to get together and talk to you about it. But so anyway, I've run 2 minutes over. And I want to say it's a great stimulation and motivation for me, and I enjoy the people. And what I always feel about is, you know, I get too busy, and I'm always behind in getting it organized. And there's always this great pressure. We want to make this next binder really have it all, and then you get in and try to orchestrate that and put on demos and make everything happen with the staff we have. As hardworking as they are, it's hard. So I don't get enough time to get acquainted with you. So it'd be really fun if you all got together sometime and invited me, and what we did was get better acquainted. Anyway, so stick around for a while if you want to and talk. And we're going to have to clean out the place sometime starting in half an hour or so, but up to then it will be nice to talking to you. So peace. We'll see you.